me. Thanks for the introduction, Nicole. So I'm Camille de Valk, and I will talk today about simulating the domino effect of defaults. So there are some things that I will introduce first, and then we'll go into the presentation. So imagine you're working at a firm, and you're doing quite well. You're doing good business. You have some clients and some suppliers, and they buy from you, and you buy from them, and everything is fine. So this is a perfect world, and there's no risk from the clients because the clients are also doing fine, and there's no risk from the suppliers. They are also doing fine. So that's all good. But unfortunately, reality is harder than this because the client and the suppliers are also can also have a link, and all of them are part of a bigger financial network. And this is the topic of today, because unfortunately you're not isolated, and you have connections. There are more connections than you have only with your neighbors. So your neighbors have all connections, and those have also connections. And in reality, this network is of course much bigger than shown here. What can happen at some point is that while you're doing good business, somewhere in the network someone is not, and this means they maybe go into default. So that means they don't pay an obligation, or at least it means in this context. So we turn them to gray. So we have some gray nodes here, and they are in default and they're not paying all their obligations. So their neighbors might also get in trouble now, which might cause them to default. And this might go on for some while, and eventually you are also at risk for this defaulting. So while you were doing good business, because of the network effects, because of this spread of this default, you're also at risk. And what I researched during my graduation project was how this work, how does this effect cascade through the network. The questions are: how many nodes will default, how fast is this defaulting going, and how much flow of money is there still going on. And of course, what's the influence of the network structure in this whole effect? To do this, there are 3 steps essentially to the presentation. First, we need to construct a financial network to run this simulation on. Then we need to actually run the simulation and interpret the results. That's the last step, of course. So let's dive into it. If there are any questions during the presentation, please post them in the comments, and I will be happy to answer them after the presentation. So how do we construct a financial network? We do this with transactions between companies. As mentioned, I'm doing the graduation research at ING at the moment, so we can observe transactions. And for this research, we use the transactions of 2019, and we place a link between two companies, with the weight of the link being the sum of the transactions of 2019. Because we can only observe Dutch ING networks, Dutch ING companies, Dutch ING accounts, there may be a lot going on that we don't observe. So just to be sure that we have a fixed network, a closed system, we filter the exogenous forces, so the private individuals, the foreign accounts, public administrations, financial institutions, and non-ING accounts. So public administrations and financial institutions, we could observe them, though they will not behave in a similar way to the companies because they will not default in a similar way. This will result in a closed system with a fixed number of links and a fixed number of nodes, and we will enforce conservation of money. And this is a controlled approximation. Of course, it's not the actual transaction network. I think there's no one that can actually observe this or model this. But given that ING is the largest bank of the Netherlands, we can say that we observe most of the transactions. So this financial network actually is quite large and is close to reality, at least for the Dutch interfirm network. The second step is to simulate the actual domino effect of these defaulting companies. So how do we do this? We run some iterations of an algorithm, the fictitious default algorithm, and it looks like this. For every node, you observe the incoming money and you observe its obligations. And if you have more incoming than obligations, you just pay them, and you save the excess money to your reserves, your profit, so to speak. And in an ideal world, for every node, this would be the case, but unfortunately, that's not the case. So there are some nodes that will be in default by definition. So if you have less incoming than obligations, you are in default. But you may have some incoming money, and this incoming money you can spend it to other companies. You pay this according to a certain strategy, which I will come to in a bit. Every stage you record the number of defaults and the total flow of money in the network, and you run this over and over. And when there are no more changes, you terminate. In reality, this can go on for more than 10,000 iterations. And remember, one iteration for us was 1 year, 2019. So that would mean we would look 10,000 years into the future. So to keep it a bit real, we stopped the simulation at 1,000 iterations. So these strategies, what are they? How can you still pay money if you are in default? There are 3 strategies that we implemented. So the first one is to divide your money equally. This actually comes from the literature on cascading defaults from about 20 years ago. So when you have less money incoming than outgoing, you divide your money equally over your creditors, and you do this to proportionally to the obligations. So if you have 50% incoming, you pay your obligations 50%. The main motivation for this is that it's quite easy for calculations. This will become a matrix multiplication, which you can run analytically. And this is what was done 20 years ago in literature. A strategy that's more motivated by observed behavior from colleagues at ING is largest creditor lost, where you pay what you can, but you do this in such an order that you pay your largest creditor last and your second largest creditor second last. So you pay the small bills until you run out of money. The motivation for this is that you have less creditors to deal with. Only a few large obligations that you don't pay. And for the simulation, this wouldn't matter, but in reality, this would mean you have you would have to ask less people for later payments. And you can also do this the other way around. So you pay your largest creditor first, so that you get rid of the large bills, and these small bills, you hope everything will be fine about them. So you won't have any big bills lying around. And there's one more flavor to choose. When you cannot pay a bill, so for the largest creditor last or first, so you can you stack these bills. The last bill you may not be able to pay. You can choose between only pay this bill when you can, so you save some money in your reserves until you can pay this bill, and then you pay the bill, and then you do this again. Or you always pay whatever you can. So if your last bill that you would pay is 1,000 euros, but you don't have 1,000 euros, you have 500 euros, you pay this 500, which is not enough, but it's something that's the idea behind this. So we observe the total flow of money in the network and see how what's the difference between these strategies, and this looks like this. As you can see, most of them tend to zero quite quickly. So I will show this on a log plot. So it's the same information as just now, but on a log scale. What we see here is the total flow of money compared to the available money flowing in the network, where the colors are the different strategies. Yeah, there are some things that we can observe. For example, the red and the orange line, so that's only pay in full strategies. Those lines are not only decreasing, they have some oscillations going on. And this is due to the fact that you can save up some money before you pay a bill, and then you can pay the bill, and then you do again this saving up, which will lead sometimes in higher flow and sometimes in lower flow. The trend overall for all the strategies is decreasing, and also for the lines with the oscillation. Another point is that the difference between the largest creditor last and largest creditor first is quite big. So remember, this is a log scale, so this is orders of magnitude. And the question now is, why is this the case? Why is largest creditor last smaller than largest creditor first in terms of total flow? And maybe you can think about this already a bit, because everyone is paying their largest bill first or their or last. So this, of course, will result in a different flow. So how does this work? When we look at the payments that are done in the last iteration, it will give a sense of which bills are paid and which bills are defaulted on. So for the orange and the blue line we just saw, the largest creditor last, we see that overall the most obligations that are still paid are on the order of 500 euros, so to speak. The area under this distribution is the total flow of money we saw in the last slide, so the height of the line. For the other strategies, the largest creditor first, we see that this distribution looks definitely different, because it's lower, but it's also more skewed to the right. And remember, this is on a log scale, so a bit to the right, so a few steps to the right can already mean thousands or maybe millions of euros more or less. So we see indeed that the area under the distribution is much higher for largest creditor first because of this log scale. So how does this compare to the obligations that had to be paid in the beginning of the simulation? I plotted them in purple. So these are not payments, but these are obligations that would have to be paid in the beginning of the simulation. And indeed, you see that for the largest creditor last case, the small payments are fulfilled, and for the largest creditor first case, the large payments are fulfilled. And this is why the difference in the flow is this is where the difference in flow comes from. So how do we interpret this? What does this mean? Where does this come from? This effect of decreasing flow. For this, we use a technique where we model the network. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we are trying to investigate what the effect of the network structure is on this cascade of defaults. You can model networks in various ways, in a variety of ways. But for our purpose, we use a technique which tries to replicate a certain property of the network. And the property that we are trying to conserve in the random network is the strength. So this is the total flow of money through a certain node. I plotted here the out strength of the ING network. The plot for the in strength is similar to this. And you can construct a random network that has similar properties. So you can do this in two ways. I plotted them both. So you see at a first glance that the strength distribution is fairly similar, which is what the random network model is trying to do. And the orange random network model, it not only tries to conserve the strengths, but also the connections between sectors. So you can imagine a bakery, for example. It may have a certain strength and it might connect in the random network to other nodes, but a bakery will almost certainly have a connection to a farmer, and not to a steel factories, for example. So you want to keep this information in the model, and that's in the orange model, the sector model, which distinguishes 737 sectors. The green model doesn't take these sectors into account. It just takes the total flow per node into account. And what we're trying to do now is we do the simulation not on the empirical network that we observe, but on the random network. And if the behavior that we observe is similar, then this effect of cascading defaults is explained by the properties of the random network, and therefore you could say that it's explained by the properties that you've constrained. When this is not the case, you can argue it the other way around. So let's look at the results. You already saw this picture, but there are more lines coming into this plot, which would make it a bit chaotic. So I plotted this in a different way, where I took the height of the the line in the last few iterations and plot it in on a bar chart. So that looks like this. There are coming more bars in this picture. So on the left, we have the empirical. We already saw this, the relative eventual size of the economy, the height of the bars. For the random networks without sector information, it looks like this. And with the sector information, it looks like this. So you can distinguish them with the hatches in the bars. There are already some things that we can see. For example, the general shape of the height of the bars, which might tell a bit how the strategies compare to each other, is similar for the empirical network and the networks where the sectors are the random networks where the sectors are constrained. And the factor is between the bars is approximately 21%. It differs a bit. Note the log scale, by the way. That's why this is 21%. There's another observable that we can plot, which is the number of companies that did not default. So the more companies that did not default, the higher the bar and the better for the economy. So for the empirical, it looks like this. For the random networks without sector information, it's like this. And for the when you replicate the sectors, it looks like this. Contrary to the relative eventual size of the economy, in this measure, so the number of not defaulted nodes, there is almost no difference between the height of the bars for pay what you can or only pay in full. So you see that there's a difference between these bars, and it's also present in the sector model, but this is not present in the number of defaulted nodes. Furthermore, there's also again the shape of this of these bars is replicated for the models where you replicate the sectors and not where you exclude the sector information. There, the number of not defaulted nodes is approximately the same. Before we draw our conclusion, we have to reiterate maybe what the assumptions were that we made we have to reiterate this. So the assumption that we made is that the obligations between the nodes in the network are constant in time, which is which may be the case, but as I mentioned, these iterations go on for 1,000 iterations, so that would mean thousands of years where the financial network is constant. Maybe you would want companies that make a profit to gain more connections, or maybe to gain to get a higher weight of the link between companies, or maybe a lower weight when the company is making a loss. You could change these obligations in time. Also, the exogenous cash flow is not considered, which might pose a threat to companies which maybe are not in danger at all. So the simulation there might improve. So there's some filtering done, which would mean that companies that are dependent on private individuals, for example, restaurants, given this simulation, they would be at risk, but maybe that's not the case at all. The same goes for companies with in sectors which are dependent on international trade, or all these other filtering points. To conclude, the difference between these strategies is as follows. So for the largest creditor first, we observe a higher flow, but there are fewer surviving companies. The higher flow is due to the fact that that people pay their large creditor first, by definition, and this happens more often than in large creditor last, which is hypothesized that this is the actual behavior of companies. But there are more surviving companies, which may be a good thing. But in general, this simulation can be improved a lot. And there's another very important conclusion, and that's when you have these random networks that preserve the flow between the sectors, the cascading default simulations results are better than when you don't conserve the flows between sectors, as is the case for the other model. And with that, I want to conclude and maybe show again our company, which was at risk or not at risk. So it matters for this company where in the financial network it is and who are the neighbors. And that's what we've shown in this presentation on cascading defaults, simulating the domino effect of defaults. If there are any questions, please ask them in the comments, and I'm happy to answer them.